Good afternoon. My name is Mike Reed. I'm Dean of the College of Health and Human Performance, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you here today for our first ever installation of an endowed professor at our college. We are so pleased to be able to have George Cunningham here and to honor him and to celebrate his accomplishments. But before we go to that important part of the ceremony, I want to take a few minutes to thank people who were so essential for this. So this whole concept was initiated by Michael Spear, who is timidly hiding out in the hallway, I think. He's our Director of Communication and Events. He had been at other universities where this was a tradition, and after he explained it, we thought that was a wonderful opportunity for us to honor our best and brightest senior faculty. And so we thank Michael Spear for that. We thank Bridget Welch, who you met at the door. She's responsible for organizing this event. We thank Jeremy Clark for all the promotion, pardon me, the promotion and the communications that allowed this, the word to get out on this. I want to acknowledge the people who are here today in this room, this very crowded room. There are a couple of seats up front if you're at the back and you'd like to sit. This includes our college leadership, chairs, deans, directors. It also includes a member of the Industry Advisory Board from Dr. Cunningham's department. Bill Carr is here. And I want to also thank so many of our faculty who are present for this and our students. It means a lot to have your colleagues here at a time like this. There are a few folks in the room who are maybe not academics and don't understand the significance of an endowed professorship. If you look at the career of folks who work in academics, the traditional trajectory for a professor is to begin as an assistant professor and then earn her or his wings, become a tenured associate professor, but not all the assistants make it to that level. And then from associate professor, not all of those folks make it to full professor. So a full professor with tenure is a highly elite accomplishment in academia. It is what we all strive for. But even among those folks, even among the full professors, there is one more level of accomplishment, and that's to have an endowed appointment. An endowed appointment recognizes your distinction, and it honors your distinction, and it provides typically a small financial supplement that can be used for your scholarly activity. There are very few of us who are endowed professors that have, or sorry, few of us who are professors that have made it to the endowed status. We are thrilled today to honor Dr. Cunningham, who has made that leap today. It's my very great privilege at this point. Did I mention the fact that we're especially proud to have Dr. Cunningham's family here? Both his sister and his sister-in-law have come from halfway across the country to be here for this ceremony. Thank you for coming. And now let me turn the microphone over to Professor Beth Barton. Beth was the chair of the search committee that ran truly an international search to recruit the next chair of our current department. It was that process that identified and was able to recruit Dr. Cunningham. And Dr. Barton will introduce Dr. Cunningham now. Beth?
Okay, thank you, Mike. And welcome, everyone. Good afternoon. As Mike alluded to, I met George when I chaired the search committee for the inaugural chair of sport management. And when we were having discussions with the faculty and the members of that committee, we wanted to find a faculty member who had gravitas, international recognition, scholarly work, and could lead this nascent new department in greater directions and become a strong, well-renowned department. When we were discussing that, names popped up, but people said, you know, well, who we really like is someone like George Cunningham. Lo and behold, George Cunningham happened to apply for the position. We were ecstatic for being able to interview him, and even more thrilled when he accepted that position. So who is George? No roasting, I promise. The only thing I do have socks on to try to replicate his colorful socks that he wears on many different days. George is a scholar in sport in terms of diversity and inclusion. And that work started with his PhD from Ohio State University, where his PhD dissertation was on diversity and bias in sport organization. That instigated his faculty position, his first faculty position at Indiana University for a brief stint, and then he was recruited to Texas A&M, where he started as an assistant professor, got tenure in 2007, and then was promoted to full professor in 2010. In addition to that work in terms of just his academics, he was also heavily involved in the university structure and policy, where this idea and this concept of diversity and inclusion not only pervaded his academic pursuits, but also really facilitated a lot of discussion at the university level, where that belief he has in making sure that diversity and inclusion are part of the fabric of the academic societies are there and at the forefront. In terms of his scholarly work, he's a prolific writer. He's published more than 200 journal articles, book chapters. He is the author of a leading textbook on diversity and inclusion in sport management, and that I think it's now in its 5th edition, which is quite telling in terms of its longevity and its, again, the solid nature of what he thinks, believes, considers, and contemplates on a daily basis. One aspect that I found in a quote in looking for what this work means to others was by a woman, Robin Means Coleman, who's the Vice President and Associate Provost for Inclusion and Diversity at Northwestern. And she wrote, "If there is ever an urgent need for accessible, clear thinking about why the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion matter, it is now." And she was referring to this textbook that George had written. And so it again spoke to me as far as the impact that he has had on this field. One last thing I'd like to allude to is, I am a STEM professor. I study physiology. And the idea of physiology and athletics is one where I am always amazed at the athletic prowess of the individuals on a playing field. How far they run, how fast they run, how much they can lift, how they can catch balls that I have no idea how they can achieve that. And that concept, I think, is part of the fabric that the UAA has sponsored and is joined with Health and Human Performance in regard to sponsoring this endowed chair. But there's another aspect of sport, and that's what George brings to this field, and I think it's what sport management is really striving for. And that's that social fabric, that social network of sport, where it's not just the players on the field, but it's how they interact with each other, how much respect they give to each other, how their coaches are interacting with them, and what happens when there are marginalized members or individuals of any sport entity, and how we can make them feel more equal and included. And so that, to me, is what I've learned more about the academics that George has brought to this field. So with that, George, congratulations, and I hand the mic over to you to let us hear more.
All right, so thank y'all for coming. Plenty of good seats up at the front. And I'll walk around a bit. I was thinking earlier today, like, what a treat for an academic. Not only do you get this really cool recognition, and you have people in the dean's office say nice things about you, and your family's here to hear them say nice things about you, but then you get to talk for 30 minutes about what you want to talk about in front of your peers and friends and family, and then you get free food afterwards. It is the perfect day. I'm buying a lotto ticket when we head home. I think the luck's on my side. And I double checked with Michael to make sure about the time, Michael Spear, and he said 30 minutes. So like a good social scientist, I've created 60 minutes worth of material, and we'll cram it into no. I will keep on time. So photo caption to Melissa Cunningham. This is me on a trip that we recently took, and I thought it was funny and captured kind of how I'm either this way or the head in a book on a flight. And that's for a couple reasons, but like when people ask, so what do you do for a living? My general response is, oh, well, I'm a professor. And then usually they'll say, okay, like they're not interested. And then sometimes they'll say, oh, well, in what? And you'll like this. I say health and human performance, because I figure they know something about it, but not enough to really like question me some more. It's very rare that I get down, they have to probe a bit for me to say, oh, well, I study diversity and inclusion in sport. Because people have, experts or not, they have ideas about what that means. And sometimes that's great, and sometimes I'll show you later on, well, that's fun. Did it go out? There we go. I'll show you later on where sometimes it's less than great, some of the feedback that they give. But are we all set and back? Okay. Good. Super. So I figure y'all are here either because you were compelled to, or for the free food, or that you actually want to hear about a little bit about diversity, equity, and inclusion in sports. So I'll give you a little bit of information, and I'll just give an overview of some of the recent research, but it kind of follows the pattern that I've pursued over the past 20 some odd years, and then different opportunities and challenges in the field, and then really the importance, I think, of the endowed professorship and what I and we want to do moving forward. So let's get going on the first one. As Dr. Barton mentioned, my research focus is in diversity and inclusion in sport. And here's, for interested people, what the book looks like. You can find it on Amazon, find it on Routledge if you're looking to purchase. I should have brought copies. But so I'll say we mostly, it's mostly a collaborative effort. And I do enjoy writing alone, but usually I work with students or other colleagues, and so mostly it's a we effort. And we look at things like access and opportunities, like the experiences people have in sport, either playing or working in sport, the role of sport in society, and then some organizational practices and things that organizations can do to make their place more inclusive. And then recently I've expanded a little bit to look at the role of bias on different outcomes, some in sport, some outside of sport. So you'll see some of that work as well. So in terms of access and opportunities, a lot of the research and even the books that I've written really look at kind of a multi-level view. So it's one thing to look at how individuals interact and kind of their behaviors and their background. But individuals are set within organizations which have their own policies and their kind of culture and ways of doing things. And then organizations, of course, are set within communities which have their own ways of doing things. And all of those impact access and opportunities. And so I've just given two examples here. Most of the work related to access and opportunities is focused on gender or race or sexual orientation. And I had a chance to write some of the intro articles for two books, and you see that here. Some other work looks at experiences in sport, and then part of the we that I mentioned before is Umar Hussein. So just a quick note about Umar. He was a student of mine at Texas A&M, and you know, I speak English, I think, fairly well, even though my loving family makes fun of my Texas accent and how I'll drop some syllables and like it's potato, not potato, and stuff like that. Umar, there we go. So Umar speaks 5 languages and worked in Pakistan for a long time in national governing bodies to promote equal rights. So like Umar, I think, hopefully learned some from me. I learned a lot from Umar, so a great relationship. In this study, we looked at esports. We can debate over the food, whether esports are actually sport. but let's pretend that it is for our purposes here. And Pakistani girls and women who participate in these sports. What was really interesting is we had observations, we conducted interviews, and that many of the participants, when you choose an avatar when you participate, they would choose avatars that were men and that were light-colored skin. And we asked, well, look, why do you do that? That's not kind of like what you look like. And it was a way of kind of resisting the cultural and societal sort of pressures that they felt were on them every day outside of the e-sport realm. So a way of kind of resisting the rest of what they were engaging with in life, which was really kind of interesting. In a way that esports, one of the kind of benefits at esports, and I think we'll see more with AI and metaverse type activities where people can engage in those sort of activities as well. Here's another example in the role of sport in society. So some colleagues and I look at things like sport for development, where sport people or organizations use sport as a way to kind of attract people into the organization, and then you provide educational activities or health activities or things like that. A colleague in Germany and I were interested in, well, what about when you participate in sport? And in Europe, you're part of sport clubs. It's a little bit different than maybe how we think about it or do it here. But what kind of role does your participation in a sport club have in your life? Like, how does it impact your attitudes? And so she had access to a European Values Survey with over 36,000 participants over 30 countries. And we looked at gender stereotypes. And so, like, older people, this is not true for everybody, just patterns. So whenever I talk about patterns, it's relationships. It doesn't mean it's true for everybody. But older people, less educated people, people in small towns, men, all were more likely to endorse gender stereotypes than their peers. But those were offset when they participated and were members of the voluntary sport clubs. And we reason that it's because you see women kind of in different roles than you do in other parts of society. They're doing cool things in sports and participating, and like you're participating alongside of them. And so it shows like there's certainly health and physiological benefits to participating in those sport clubs, but there's social benefits as well, as we showed with the study here. Another kind of thread of our research is looking at organizational practices. So what do organizations do to make their workplace inclusive? In a recent study that came out this year, we looked at policies for fan inclusiveness. So like if you go to some games, maybe you hear things you don't want to hear from other fans. Sometimes those are just like booing or something, but sometimes they're racist taunts or homophobic taunts. And organizations can have policies against that. And so we looked at, well, what sort of organization has those policies? And we found, looking at the NCAA, that private universities, research-intensive universities, larger universities were all likely to have policies against homophobic language from the fans or have a fan code of conduct. And then also departments that also had gender equity kind of in their department as well. So like if they provided equitable opportunities for women to participate relative to the percent of women on campus. And so there's community factors and there's organizational factors that influence the decision making for those leaders in the organizations. So hopefully y'all can see this, front row maybe. So I mentioned before, some of the more recent research has looked at bias in the community level. Many times people think about bias, like if you read about it in the paper, you probably read about individual biases that people have. But communities take on a shared property for the bias that they have as well. So certainly not everybody in the community will think the same, but in general, you can have kind of a shared understanding of bias toward whatever groups. So we thought, oh, well, that's kind of cool, and how that works. It's more stable, it's more predictive of different outcomes. We conducted one study a couple years ago looking at athletic departments and found that in communities with low levels of implicit bias toward lesbian, gay, and bisexual people, then they're more likely to have an inclusive policy and strategy that they follow, and the relationship between those inclusive policies and sport performance was even stronger in those communities. So it really benefits to be set in a community where, like, what you're doing in your organization matches the values of the community. And in this case, inclusiveness was the thing that really helped drive performance. So we thought, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting finding. Maybe there could be some more evidence of community biases and kind of the impact. So I mentioned my colleague in Germany. We recently conducted a study looking at women's health. This is a little bit less positive on the bias side. And we collected 15 years of data for each of the 50 states in the US and looked at the life expectancy for women. And then we thought, well, there's probably work characteristics in each state that kind of impact how women experience work. And so we focused on sexual harassment claims, on people's biases about women at work, and then unemployment rates. And as each of these went up, so the more sexual harassment in the state, the stronger the bias among people in the state, that collective bias, and then the higher the unemployment, life expectancy went down for women in those states. So if each of these went up, life expectancy went down, which really shows the value of having inclusive workplaces, not only just for like performance, but it actually has health outcomes, in this case life expectancy in years, for women working in those states. So that's a very brief overview, kind of a 10,000 foot view of things. And I thought, well, it may be interesting to look at some of the reactions that people have had. One, this kind of off-color, it's actually manila, the folder was. Well, it's pretty cool is the NCAA reached out to us a couple years ago and said, hey, we see you're doing this work. Will you do a study for us to look at athletic departments and kind of how they go about things? So we identified 5 departments that did really good work and interviewed everywhere from president to athletes on the teams. And there were close to 100 different interviews that we conducted. And then put together this packet that was sent to every athletic director in the US. So I thought, well, that's cool. Like, that's well more people than read my journal articles, which is pretty fun. Another thing, this was this year, which really, I was tickled pink about this. So a professor who uses my book at another university texted me and said, hey, let me give you a holler, or give me a holler when you can. I said, okay. And he relayed that they used my book, so that was number one. But they used my book in his class, and that a student came up to him after class and said, hey, I usually rent my books. I'll just read it. So she said, I really like this book. I always rent mine, but I'm going to buy this one, which was great. And I talk so much about it, my parents are even reading it, which is nuts. Like, I don't know many parents reading the textbooks, but I thought that was such positive feedback from the student, and that not only were they reading it, but like it was impacting them positively as well. So those have been the good. Some of the bad, so I recently published a diversity and inclusion at work book and was excited about it, just posted it on LinkedIn. My work colleague, who I've never met, by the way, this scholar, then decided on the LinkedIn page to put that. So that was fun. I thought about sending Bruce a copy of the book, but I thought, well, no need to poke the bear. This one, I got a voicemail that I should have, I was at another university, I didn't save it, I should have saved it, that had more stuff related to that. But we had published a paper about how racism takes on a shared property in counties. The higher the racism, the more COVID deaths and cases, especially for black individuals. And USA Today ran a story about it, and so it was kind of widely published. And after that, got this email, which I thought, man, that takes some gumption, and then a phone message about it as well. The really interesting one that I didn't include on here, I was trying to figure out the year. I think it was around 2005. It's when we developed the first diversity class at Texas A&M where I used to work. And I was an assistant professor, like 2 years there, 1 year there, somewhere in there. A full professor came up to me and said, George, as a Christian, I'm surprised you're teaching this, especially some of these topics. And I thought, well, how do I respond to that? So I thanked him for his time and said, well, I think there's a lot of reasons to teach that even with my beliefs. So I'll list some of the reasons here. So I'll just say that, I'll go to the next slide. I'll just say that that kind of shapes how go about life, how we raise our kids. There's no reason to get upset about it, but so there is a reason to the madness, a method to the madness. I'll leave it at that. So for the last part, I'm glad, where did he go? There was a UAA person in here. He may have left. Anyhow, there we go. Thank you. So I am so just thrilled about the endowed professorship. And like, it's humbling. There are so many great scholars in this college. And to be selected among them was like, I think, your first reaction is, are you sure? Like, don't you know about person A through Z here? So it is great. And it allows so many opportunities on things that, like, I think we've been doing good work before, but we have some resources where we can do even bigger and better things. So some of those are like new projects, bigger projects, novel data sets that we have access to now, supporting students, their travel, their research opportunities, and then, like, for people who don't know about this, the professors do funny things. They publish, they do their work, they get paid to do their work, but then they submit it to a journal, and they don't get paid to submit it to the journal, and then they publish it, but everybody else has to pay to read it, unless you have a subscription through the library. But you can pay a handsome fee to make it what's called open access, and then the world can read it. So we can use these funds to pay for open access and make it accessible. I post them all on my website anyway to make it accessible, and the publishers don't say to take it down. So you can, but now we'll do it legitimately. So yeah, it's just like outstanding, the things that we can do, and I'm so appreciative of it. So thank you very much. Go Gators. In Game 5 tonight, go Rangers. 1 win away. And we don't have Nelson Cruz playing right field, so I'm feeling good about it. So thank you again. I tried this out. We're going to see if this works. This links to the website. And I saw somebody do it at a conference recently, and I thought, oh, what a cool thing. So if you want to see the Diversity in Sport website that has all of the publications on there, you can access it there. So there we go.
Recognizing endowed professors, I want to present you on behalf of the college with this medal that's engraved with your name.
Look at
and
that.
The UAA endowed professor status that you now hold. Congratulations on what you've done. We're really, really proud of you.
Thank you so much. This is super. Thank you.
At this point, we kept talking about the food. We can now go into the